Today we have our another new episode, and we will discuss on uh, EdTech, and especially we will focus on research and innovations. We have our world famous speaker, Mr. David Schumacher, and Madam Viva. So first, I would like to give chance, Mr. David Schumacher.
Yeah, hello, Sharif. Well, thanks for the invitation to speak today on this topic. Innovation and education are both two areas of great interest to me. And besides having an academic interest, I've also had the interest of using some of this technology over the years and seeing how it's developed. But I guess first I should start with an explanation of terms. So the way I'm using EdTech or educational technology is I'm using it to refer to technology that enhances teaching and learning experiences. And there's been um, a great transformation that's come about in this over the years. The online learning platforms that we see from areas like Coursera or Udemy or Khan Academy are out there, and I think they're probably well known to your viewers. But then there's other things too, like MOOCs, massive open online courses that can have unlimited enrollment and are accessible anywhere in the world with an internet connection. Of course, Coursera uses things like that, but then there are others that do as well. An area that I find really interesting is this idea of adaptive learning. Instead of a one size fits all type of an approach, adaptive learning allows technology then to be personalized to somebody's individual experiences. I'm sure you've had one or two of the kind of experiences where you've been in, say, a class, and either the material's moving along too fast for you and you're struggling to keep up, or I'm not sure is any better. You're in class and you're bored because the teacher is teaching to the lowest knowledge level in the class, and maybe you have a background in this and you're daydreaming or uh, writing in the margins of your notes about other things that you have coming up. So this whole idea of adaptive learning, I think, is really exciting as far as student engagement is concerned and more effective use of teachers. Now, we've had shows on vertical reality, augmented reality, speaking in general, but there are specific ideas and ways to use this, innovative ways to use this in education. So in the past, you would maybe say, like in a particular class, say in business, and you would talk about the business model in class, and then maybe the instructor or teacher would arrange perhaps like a field trip to go look at something in person. But virtual reality, augmented reality, you can combine that all to a classroom experience without the need for buses and spending a half a day to go someplace. Gamification is another area of innovation that I find really exciting too, because I think we all like to play games, but my son, daughter, and grandkids spend much more time playing games, especially electronic games, than I do or have. And if you can combine that with an educational elements, then it's back to making learning fun. And what you find fun, you tend to spend more time with. And then it's also a bit self-directed, or you could think of it back to the adaptive learning that I was talking about, because you're going to be drawn perhaps to fun experiences that you really like, learn about them in a gamed environment, even though it's education, and then be able to perhaps translate that into the real world. And of course, one of the biggest things that we're all talking about today with ChatGPT and others is, of course, artificial intelligence and generative artificial intelligence specifically. And besides using that in class or maybe using that in a curriculum setting, it's also something that we can do on our own. In the past, in the distant past, if I wanted to learn something, I would have to get a book, a magazine, go to the library, do some research, and then fast forward to the internet and search engines, and now I was able to do this just by sitting behind my computer and then eventually by the phone that I held in my hand looking something up. But what I'm finding today as I experiment with the generative AI that's out there is I can open up, I have 2 or 3 that I use, so I'm not advertising for any particular one. But I can take one of these generative AI technologies and speak into it and say, tell me about. And then it will open up and give me perhaps a broad brush, which then gives me ideas, or even it will suggest ideas and say, would you like to know more about this concept, or this concept, which are sub-concepts in what it is that I'm trying to learn about. So it's almost like having my own personalized teacher where I can say, tell me about this, and then I can keep zeroing in on the parts that I find interesting or something that's new that I hadn't heard before. And the great thing is that I can do this not just sitting in front of my computer like I'm doing now or with my laptop, but I can do it with my tablet, I can do it with my phone, and I can do it pretty much anywhere where I have some downtime. Back to the internet real quick is the idea of collaborative learning tools. And maybe that's a little bit of what we're doing right now. We have people from various parts of the world here that can sit and discuss a particular topic, and we could bring in a number of people, or they could ask questions from the audience, like what happens here. We have this learning environment where one person says something which feeds the interest off of somebody else, and we can then have a greater learning experience. And of course, there are specific tools that are built around this. So what I think of as G Suite, that Google recently relabeled as Google Workspace. You have Microsoft Teams, and then you have a myriad of other ways to collaborate, such as Discord, for example. So lots of innovation going on in the education space. And maybe on my next go around, we'll talk about some of the companies or some other aspect of it. But that's my overview at this point, Dr. Sharif.
Thank you, Dr. Viva. What
Yes.
you want to share? Yeah. We are discussing about EdTech. So I know that you have a very interesting content. So what you want to share with our audience?
Yeah, right now I've been running a live stream series educating with 12 to 14 minute PowerPoint videos on the hydroxyl dispersal that my company is proposing to do, which we're getting closer and closer to being green lighted on. So that was a 9-week course, which turned into 11 weeks. And I have had good feedback from people on that, from just showing it on Facebook and the social media platforms, LinkedIn as well, and my own website, vivacunliffe.com. Now, though, the algorithm on my computer is now sending me advertisements to set up my own course. So there's, on the EdTech side, there is a lot of opportunity for people to take content that they do actually develop and packaging it for, you can either do events, for a business, or you can do courses. And there are companies that will streamline that for you, both of them, and they'll do them affordably. And what's really interesting, I watched a seminar about doing events here that are educational, and provide a public good built into some kind of a business agenda like sales, and they are becoming very popular, and their conversion rate for the sales side is very high. So what's happening is there's a blending of privatization as well that is being accommodated with EdTech as well, that is also really an interesting area to do. I would not put the hydroxyl radical information out as a course that people had to pay to see, because I think that with science contributions, there is sort of a belief that when you write your academic papers, you're not really getting paid for that. That's a contribution to the science commons and the knowledge base. And so I don't know where that future is going to end up, but I think we get some feedback from people that they're a little suspicious of us because we're offering a technology to fight climate change and we're charging a little bit of money for it, and they're suspicious of that. So my defense of that is that when you're bringing expertise and knowledge to the table and services, you do need to cover your costs. And it's the same thing with EdTech. What's really interesting about all of this technology is it's reducing the cost of information and knowledge transfer. But one of the things I wanted to mention is that I think that emerging economies are getting falling behind. They're always behind on some level. And I'd like to address that because I do have one criticism about the technology platforms that are leapfrogging over in emerging economies. I don't think that people should have just had cell phones. I think that they really should have focused on getting tablets into people's hands, because you can do much more reading and audio-visual support with those for the students in emerging economies. I think it's really important to understand that. I think that the cell phone itself is actually, for the most part, it's a bottleneck for people to do deep learning. I mean, you can look stuff up on it, but it's knowledge light. But when you want to get a little deeper, you want to have a little bit more technology supporting you. And I think that it would be wise for, more emphasis on slightly larger tech for the emerging economy students. And so anyway, especially if they're going to be cheaper than the full, desktop computers. But yeah, my interest is in seeing education get more and more democratized with the ed technology, and I think that's happening along with incorporating business opportunities into that for a lot of our more educated people, and it's giving some of these people, like in Canada, everybody and her dog has a master's degree. Okay, so now the people can turn around and they can say, well, how can I turn my content into a small side gig? And I think a lot of those side gigs are going to, result in hopefully helping lift the emerging economy students and other, less privileged students educationally. I think it's really important to think about that, rather than just always, the United States is a super high tech country. And, like David, you mentioned that you have a phone and a tablet and a laptop, and you may have a desktop computer too. That's really teched out. You probably have also got a virtual reality headset. Yeah, so not every, and you're watching, you've got an Aura ring, you watch your sleep, and you do all that stuff. There are lots of people that aren't teched out like that, and we need to include them in this conversation. So that's my opening remark.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. David Schumacher. Yeah.
Well, that was excellent, Viva. Thank you. And of course, I've been a tech geek ever since I can remember. So some say that I've always been on the leading edge of tech. Sometimes that was the bleeding edge of tech because there was disaster for being an early adopter as well. But yes, I share your sentiment for being able to spread the technology. I think cross-platform, making the content available, which is now fairly easy to do across all those different platforms, is a good step. And that's become fairly commonplace. But I share your ideas about being able to get the right tech for the right purpose in the right hands at the right time. And that will be an ongoing effort, I would think. Perhaps governments are involved. I think I also see entrepreneurial opportunity there too, which leads me to want to comment on something else that you said about people being suspicious for charging for carbon cleanup with your system. I find that really odd because the entrepreneurial mindset in its benevolent form would want to be able to create value, which cleaning up carbon from the atmosphere would clearly do. And there needs to be compensation to cover that. So this whole idea of being suspicious for making money for doing something good leads me to say, what, people aren't suspicious of making money for doing something bad? Okay, that's an oversimplification, but I think that's a little crazy. I think the whole idea of benevolent companies, benevolent entrepreneurship, is the idea that value for owners, shareholders, and the general public don't have to be at odds for each other. And as a matter of fact, from my viewpoint, when all of those are aligned, that's the sweet spot. That's where things really happen because people are engaged, have the resources to be able to do that. So that's my editorial on that. One of the things I wanted to talk about in the second go around were some of the companies that are out there that are innovating, that have taken some of the, they're creating value. Going back to that, they're creating value. They're filling gaps, like Coursera being able to offer a wide range of courses from top universities and institutions. Back decades ago, when I started my higher level learning adventure, which hasn't ended, by the way, I've got more to say about that. But back then, that wasn't available to anybody I knew unless you were, financially pretty well set or were so gifted that you could receive scholarships to some of these major universities, institutions. And now you can take these courses from very respected places that are free in some cases and very affordable in others. So that's tremendous. I think the vast diversity that we're seeing in places like Coursera, Udemy, Khan Academy, being able to take the technology that makes it so that you can take existing material, as Viva was talking about, and being able to package that and being able to present that as a course. The flip side of that is micro-certification, which means that I can get certified about having some knowledge in a particular topic without necessarily committing to multiple years or a much broader scale. So great diversity in courses from quality institutions with some type of certification that's showing that you understand this. So not only do you have the tools yourself, but you have some way to communicate this to business partners, potential employers, whatever that might be. All these technologies are there today. I recently finished up a course of study I'd been working on, not a micro, more macro. So it took me about 3 years to get through this course of study, and I got my piece of paper that says, okay, I did this. But I also was invited to download a file that I can send to potential employers or, once again, business partners or investors and say, this certifies from this institution electronically this course of study that I went through. So I'm glad to see this in higher education. This was at the university level. I've seen it previously in the professional industrial certification level. When I did my Microsoft certifications for systems engineering, they had a similar process a decade or two ago. So I'm glad to see it move out now into the more mainstream area. But it doesn't have to be something that you necessarily want to get certified on at a university or higher education level. A friend of mine who speaks herself, I can't remember now, 4 or 5 languages, many of them fluently, showed me, because I was telling her that I have a particular language that I've had a hard time with, that I've started and stopped. And she introduced me to something called Duolingo, which gamifies the ability to learn, and I'm finding it to be much better. So there's an innovation, a creation of value that's taking gamification that we talked about a little bit earlier and applying it in a setting where I'm not looking for language credit anywhere. I just want to be able to converse in this other language a little better. And having those options, that there can be other language programs for other people that may help them. But I think gamification's is a good way to do that. There's even software out there for students to be able to create some of their own educational tools. You can get flashcards if you want to work on memorization of topics and short answers, but like Quizlet allows you to create your own and then even share those and study material, among your peers. So a lot of cool stuff as far as that's concerned. And there are many others. Innovation is what education needs, because we have a very fastly evolving business and work environment here in the 21st century that's only going to come at us at an ever increasing rate. The use of these tools, the more that we can personalize and put the education experience back in the hands of the person that wants the material, and to make the use of facilitators and educators more efficient, is exactly what we need at exactly the right time. And I guess that's what innovation is all about. So I'll leave it there for this go around. Thank you, Sharif.
Thank you, Madam Viva.
I just have a couple of questions for you, David. When you look at the traditional public school platform and format, formal teaching, what do you see in terms of technology that'll get in there in the United States, and then maybe talk about what might leapfrog to the emerging economies? Do you have any thoughts on that? And I have another question behind that.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great topic, and it's a multifaceted topic. I'll try to rein myself in a little bit. So the traditional school system is not so traditional anymore, but I think I understand what you mean. If you're talking about the brick and mortar K through 12, if you're talking about the standard class size 20, 30
Mm.
students, one teacher, one topic per hour over a course of,
Yeah.
I don't know, 6 or 7 hours. That's an outgrowth from the past, obviously.
What about
And
peer, what about the but there's peer influence and socialization, so that might get lost in the mix. So I'll just add that in there
oh,
before we finish.
yeah. So that can, I supposedly, be good and bad. I think we've probably all had peer experiences in school that we would categorize as desirable or undesirable. But
Mhm.
clearly, during the pandemic, one of the things that was cited for remote learning was the lack of socialization.
Yeah.
I challenge that a little bit, by the way. I think what the pandemic showed is that the tools that the brick and mortar K through 12 schools had for remote learning was not up to the task. Because during the education that I talked about, that I spent the last couple of years on, that I recently finished up, we had a required amount of, I guess you could call it socialization, but this was a completely online system. And our socialization was at the university level, so a lot of it was writing between students and collaborating and so forth. All I mean to say is that I think at whatever age level in the remote environment, the electronic environment, we can incorporate that kind of peer collaboration and socialization that goes with it. Not through the last class that I did, but actually a college class that I took some decades ago. It was remote learning as well, but we didn't have the internet at that time. So that gives you some idea how long ago this class was that I'm talking about. So it was actually done by an education channel on cable TV, and you had to sit through lectures on cable TV once a week, and then you had to submit papers and send them in. From the socialization standpoint, to your comment, is that it was an astronomy class, so it was very well suited for television. But then we had, I can't remember now the number, 6, maybe 8 lab sessions that we had to go on campus for. So there was a socialization element that was physical even then. And this was done with much older technology than we have today. I think AR and VR, of course, are going to be able to help in that regard. But still, there's nothing quite like that one-on-one human communication. And I think there's ways to do that, whether it be small groups. But back to your original question, the K through 12 standard model needs to adapt. And I don't think you'll find probably anybody that disagrees with that.
Mhm.
It could perhaps become a political struggle, unfortunately, as we talk about how to go about doing that, and what should be
Yeah.
available and what should not be available. And that's another tangent that can really muddy the waters. But strictly from an innovation side of things, I think it's very rich to be able to use the tools that we have. Let me give you one example. Something I think they call reverse classroom. I'm not quite sure that's the right title. I'm doing this from memory. But so there's a regular classroom time, but the classroom time is not spent on the teacher standing in front and lecturing and then doing quizzes and tests. The course curriculum is set up so that each student does their own independent learning, and they have assigned reading and video and audio requirements that they have to do. And these can come from some of the courses that we've already talked about. They can come from such things as YouTube. They can come from a variety of different sources, and the students do those on their own. How the class, that's the homework. So the homework is done beforehand, not afterwards. And then you bring the homework into the classroom, and the classroom becomes a collaborative discussion of what you've learned and allows students to help each other, as well as the instructor, the facilitator, to keep things on track. So there's a good idea where you can take and blend the brick and mortar K through 12, kind of flip it on its ears, use the new technology, And it allows students then to really pursue at the level that they want the information. And then you have the peer pressure of showing up in class, because you don't want to be that person that shows up unprepared, right? So there's a lot of good aspects going for it there. So you can tell me what you thought of those, and if that spurred any other questions, if you like.
Yeah, that's really good. I think that's really informative for the audience. I just think that the other thing that's happening with the brick and mortar formal in-person schooling is the whole educational agenda is under it's on the hot seat as Chat GPT and AI rolls out. Like, what are these kids going to decide they have to learn? And, what are the teachers going to guide them into, in light of the fact that AI is going to take over so many different occupations? We're all watching those news feeds about what jobs are being targeted by AI and how far they've gotten, even with the journeyman construction robots. I mean, it's phenomenal. So what I'd like you to do is talk a little bit about, what kind of education agenda approaches and discovery we need to do while we have all this technology available to us, and these students that are going into the future with all of these different new waves of limitations and opportunities because of the technology.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you're thinking about that. I definitely have some opinions in that area, but let me say that flexibility is key, adaptability is key, and we can't be afraid of new tools. So we have some past experiences that we could parallel as we talk about this, but let's just take ChatGPT that you talked about, because I mentioned that a large part of especially university level education is writing papers and so forth. So ChatGPT is getting all of the news right now, as it should. I think it's waking up people to what's been going on outside of their level of recognition. So as I've been writing papers over the last 3 years, the papers have been mine, the research has been mine, but I've used plenty of AI tools to help me along the way. I guess I already mentioned about being an early adopter of technology. So I would suggest humbly that teachers, educators, facilitators take a model and say, let's integrate these AI tools, especially generative AI, into our curriculum, much like we did with, say, the typewriter or the word processor. Now, I realize that's not a pure analogy, but what I'm trying to say is that I can remember a time where I had to handwrite papers to be turned in, and there was a particular format, spacing, and so forth. And then that was adapted to being double spaced on a typewriter, and then it was later adapted for word processing. So we need to take this idea of taking new tools and adapting them to the learning environment. I never really wanted to be a great typist. So my first time around getting a degree, I paid to have all my papers typed for me so that they had the look and feel that the professors wanted. And I spent my time on research and formulating. And I took that model to using AI tools when I started back on this last bit of education that I wanted to do. Except I did my research a little differently. I had an online library versus needing to go to a physical library. So that online library is a tool. I used a word processing software to capture my notes. And my notes not only captured the information, but captured everything that I needed to do APA citations for the papers.
What software was it?
It was Microsoft Word,
Okay.
just a general word processor. Okay, so it allowed me to just capture all my thoughts, and then it allowed me to take and organize the research that I done, and then fill in between with my own ideas or how I was tying them together. And as I was going through with Microsoft Word doing this, it would correct me if I misspelled something. And then since I was just taking raw notes, sometimes it would warn me of, like incomplete sentences or whatever that I would ignore. But I was using, what I want to talk about is I was using the tool. And that tool made my research much more efficient than hand scribing notes as I'd done in the past, hand scribing a paper and taking and having it typed someplace. So once I had the paper laid out and I started writing the paper, or I'd finished my first draft, Microsoft Word along the way, and once again, not an advertisement for them, there's a lot of good word processors out there that'll do all this too. It helped me in a very rudimentary fashion with grammar and such things. But I invested in an AI grammar checking tool. Not only that, the online university that I was going to had their own grammar checking and plagiarism tools that you could use as well. I didn't like theirs as well. I thought they were a little clumsier than one that I was willing to pay for by myself. And it would actually suggest paragraph rewrites. It would say, this isn't clear. Still my research, my thoughts. I'm using a tool to present my material in a better fashion. So how do we take this out to what ChatGPT and other generative technologies is doing? I mentioned earlier that I like using these generative AIs to help me learn something new. I can say, just pick something out of the air. Tell me about fly fishing. I don't know anything about fly fishing. And it can come back and explain to me what that is, and then explain to me that there's different ways of tying flies for fly fishing and different materials that you can use, and that all sparks interest. And then I ask questions about all of those. So if I was doing a paper on fly fishing, it's still my research. It's still my inquisitive process. And I would urge, especially at this current level of AI technologies that we have, to cross-reference that with perhaps others and maybe do some Google searches on your own, or any other type of search engine searches to cross-reference the data, because what comes out of these can be wrong or can be incomplete.
It can.
So what's the human element here? The human element is using all these tools and pulling it together for what? For presentation to a human audience. We're using the AI tools as a way to handle this. And I think we're going to see this as a broader trend into the jobs that people worry about being displaced. So couple things from there. Let's take legal services. I really don't have a legal background, but this is just one that comes to mind. I've had to hire attorneys in the past for various things, and a lot of what they would write, I'm sure, was boilerplate, meaning that it was just standard clauses and so forth that they would have put together, but they're not putting it together. They're going to have a paralegal perhaps go through and do this, and then it will go to the credentialed attorney to look through before it's given out to a client. So I think there might be a model there for how we're going to see some of these jobs go. Could the paralegal be replaced by AI? Perhaps, but I still think there's going to be a level of check and balance before you get to the credentialed human to have that done. So it's a matter of freeing us up to do things that to do more, because it's going to be more. An example would be even just using the generative AI to study requires asking the right questions. I foresee a job coming to be like a human AI feeder front end to make sure that the right questions are asked and that for the particular audience that it needs to go for. The human to human touch is the glue that we can use to tie all these AI tools together. Perhaps if I realize I'm probably stepping on toes. Let's say that I have friends in the construction industry that love swinging a hammer or a nail gun all day long, but that's a very dangerous job that is best done at younger ages. And as the population worldwide expands, wouldn't it be great to take those dangerous jobs and be able to have those done by automation, perhaps in the form of a robot or something that we haven't thought of, and being able to free people to do other things? Because there's still plenty of other jobs in construction that go back to building that AI, that go back to building that human to human connection. Is the aesthetics of the building that the architect planned for correct? Is that the correct shade of paint? And I'm not talking about matching a paint color. I'm talking about, is it pleasing overall? These are questions that are best answered by humans because it's going to be humans that are going to be asking those questions. So we're going to see new jobs. We're going to see these things, I think, not as threats. Eventually, we always see things as threats first. That's part of human nature. But I think that will we see the equivalent of typing pools, of typewriters go away in place of a smaller group of people doing word processing, or maybe even those going away and just the principals doing their own word processing themselves. That's an analogy that we have from the past. We'll see that, but we'll also see opportunities for new jobs that we can't think of right now, or sound like science fiction right now, but that's coming sooner rather than later. So a lot of words there. I hope it addressed the idea that you were going for.
Yeah, I do think that teachers at all levels are, tasked with keeping track of what AI is going to displace, and how we can see, also to help people recognize what kind of new job opportunity is going to emerge. Because one of the things that's going to happen when you say that flexibility for everybody is going to be, very important, I think people are going to actually have to be prepared to change midstream on things and reverse course. Like, you need to be prepared to do that at the drop of a hat. I mean, to a certain extent already, that's true. But I think right now there is, in this churning process that AI is creating, I think that we just need to really watch, and we're gonna make mistakes in applying it, but and we have to be prepared to make mistakes with it as well too, because a lot of people don't have the ability yet. They need to be coached on it, to prompt AI for their research. And so that's a whole teaching area that will be, the teachers will be tasked with making sure everybody gets a floor base level skill to do. And then from there, I think, the whole AI thing, with the exception of the bad actors, is humanity's oyster.
Yeah, it really is. And actually, the better that we're educated as a populace, the harder it makes it for the bad actors. Because still, the social aspect of like phishing scams and so forth is still where I think the bad actors have the most play. It's easier for us in technology companies to be able to defend against a technological threat. Not foolproof, obviously, as we see from time to time, but it's the social aspects. So I see companies that spend a great deal of time training their employees and rewarding them for recognizing phishing opportunities, for example, because of the social engineering side of the bad actors. So that education and writing that material and doing that kind of job in a corporate environment is a job that didn't exist, what, a decade ago.
Mhm.
So there's another example of new work.
Mm.
I'll speak for myself, but I think it applies. It's so easy to see the past. It's so hard to see the future, even for those of us that really try to envision it. We have to realize that we're going to miss uh, things that are just off of our radar.
Yeah.
AI is coming onto the radar. AI is going to make and is already making great gains in various areas. We're talking about education today, but I've read reports of how it's being used to research new pharmaceuticals and in a number of other areas. So it's a tool, and we have to remember that the tool is not an end in
In
itself.
itself, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we have to all remember that. That's a really good note to add to the end of this conversation, which I guess we're getting close. So, yeah.
How do you plan to use? I've seen your presentation on the hydroxyl radical carbon
Mm.
capture. Is there an element for an AI integration there?
Yes, there is.
Okay.
Actual robots, but they
Ah,
will have to be supervised. They'll have to be supervised. So, but I don't envision that happening for 1 or 2 decades, because I think that the rollout of robots is there's a heavy amount of competition for them that's going to happen, and the resources. I mean, human resources. I think working on our technology, it's going to be a lot of fun because it's not terribly challenging. So there will be an element where people can just be themselves rather than just on a hamster wheel. And we're going to do some charity work as well with the company, with a new charity that I've started, the Omega Settlements Foundation. And we're going to include that in the company. We sponsor it corporately. And what we do is we're working on poverty reduction in emerging economies with that charity. So they're climate related poverty reductions. So much of what's happening with the emerging economies and climate change need the support of all the technology that we have, and financial support and loss and damages. We really need to go there. So yeah, we'll use the internet and platform to help advance some improvements for people that are facing the front lines of climate change while we actually remove carbon from the atmosphere. So I think it'll be a pretty interesting combination, and that will make sure the human element remains interesting.
yeah, I think that's really great. And that reminds me that as requirements come up for how to implement what you're doing and things that you may see that you wish to do in the future that maybe aren't on the drawing board right now, other companies are going to be in that same situation, which means they need to have people that they can bring on to help to work in these new areas, whether it be robotics, artificial intelligence, whatever those areas are, and that needs to be fed back into the school system. So we need this constant feedback loop
Yeah,
because educators can't be
badly.
just coming up with this on their own. One of the private schools that I've taught with, and probably them all, but I was just involved in this particular one, had a board of advisors from local businesses, and we were teaching tech subjects. So we had the major tech employers that would meet, I think it was on a quarterly basis, and they would review curriculum. They would come sometimes send a representative and sit in various classes, but it was a very tight integration because obviously the schools, to be relevant, want to be teaching
What's relevant?
tasks, knowledge levels that can be used. And a major complaint from some of the businesses that I hear today is that, trying to find the right person for the right job. So as knowledge accelerates, which I believe is happening, this becomes even more important, and how it's applied. So in the past, I might have thought that we would become more fragmented over this because there's so much knowledge. One person can't learn it all. You tend to learn a very narrow area. But now our automation tools, robotics and AI and so forth, can do a lot of work that we really don't need to know how to do. What we need to know how to do is to recognize what needs to be done and how to evaluate it, and to look for opportunities, perhaps from customer feedback or community feedback that says, these are changes that need to be made.
Yeah.
And that needs to be a real tight integration. So once a quarter meeting maybe needs to be some type of collaborative tool that's almost 24/7, making adjustments. And in the past, that would have been impossible with the tools that educators would have had. But now you can make, as you pointed out, you can make changes on the fly as you go, as long as regulatory and policy requirements allow that. So that's going to be an area of discussion as we move forward. Being able to, like standardized testing, for example. When they came out with standardized testing for schools, my kids were still in the school system, and I thought that was a good idea. You should have, some basic things that you need to learn.
A floor.
But I think it's too generalized, and it's always going to be looking in the rearview mirror for what we should have been teaching them yesterday. We need to find other mechanisms to be able to
project,
judge what the students are doing and what the employers want and what the community wants, because it's more than just the employers. We need to have well-rounded citizens as well. So yeah, this is such a great topic. I'm sure we could go on for days.
Thank you. This is very interesting discussion. Madam Viva, what's your concluding remark for today?
I would just like to say that, we live on a planet where we still have people that live in the Stone Age while we're flying to Mars on huge rockets. So we need to think of the people that don't have as much as we do and figure out ways to equitably and democratically lift those boats so that they have opportunity as well and can share in the blessings that are going to come from the future, which is very, very interesting. So that's what I'd like to say.
Thank you. Mr. David, what's your concluding remarks?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I want to throw in a couple of nuances from my point of view. I think personal choice here is a really big issue. I know there's probably many people that want to have learning experiences greater than what's available to them, and I absolutely agree that we need to do something with that. But I also know people that are just happy right where they're at, and that needs to be a choice, and needs to not needs to be a stigma as far as what they wish to do. The second part of that is that extending educational opportunities across the United States, because we have a lot of different economic levels here in this country as well, but then also into the developing world and other parts of the world. This needs to not be seen as benevolence or charity, I think. I think that too goes back to a stigma. It is in my best interest that my neighbor has all the education that they wish. It's in my best interest that my neighboring countries have that. So this is not a do-good, feel-good. This is an economic and social necessity. And I think I'll leave it there for today, Dr. Sharif.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining today's session. I request all of our audience, please share our content as much as possible with your government agency, corporation, and academy. Thank you everyone for joining today's session. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.